art is inwardly focused. I am creating art based off of what I'm feeling and what I need to express.
You'd want someone to also put their heart and soul into receiving it. That's the whole point. So if you're someone who's struggling with anxiety, or you're having an existential crisis around who you are, you need deeper answers, you want to go to the right tools. You know, the people that come to these experiences, the sound meditation experience, most of them are dealing with big questions like, do I stay with my husband? You want to really go deep to be able to make sure that you're coming up with an answer that's sustainable and that's the right path for you. And a sound meditation brings about a different sort of engagement, creates a different sort of a point of resonance, actually. So like, there's a time and place for everything. And I think just knowing, okay, if I want to render a result like the clarity about this big decision I want to make, sound meditation is probably a better way to go than most modalities I know, because you get deeper into yourself, and that's where the answers really are, So that's really what I love about sound meditation. It helped me when I was grappling with figuring out whether I should divorce my wife. And I went into a sound meditation, and I got the clarity and the conviction to actually go through with that. It was the toughest decision of my life.
I want to learn how you hold art and the inward versus outward focus in the creation process. Quddus, Q, what's up, bro? Welcome to the Creative Path Podcast.
Thank you.
I'm really excited to dive into this conversation with you because you're someone who has been around and worked with some of the most creative minds that people know about in mainstream, and you've had your own journey with creativity. And so for people who don't know you at all, give us the log line of you and how you've gotten here today.
Sure. So I'll give you as brief a version as possible. Definitely been a journey, but it started with being a DJ, and then that led to being a VJ on MTV when that was still a thing. Now, VJs don't have jobs. YouTube basically came in and was the place where people would get music videos. But back in the day, MTV was a thing. I was a host on that show, and the channel was MTV. The show was Total Request Live, and it was a huge show for people who grew up on that.
TRL.
Carson Daly built the house, and I came in and kept it for 5 years. And then I got really interested in working with artists in a more intimate, more creative way. I'd gotten to be friends with guys like Kanye West at the time, who's making the College Dropout album. He would bring me in on sessions and ask me for my opinion, and it started to get around that I actually had input on these different songs. And so then I got a call from MySpace Records at the time. Was a interesting proposition. MySpace was the biggest discovery platform for artists. Took some of the thunder from MTV, and I got really interested in doing artist development over there because they had a partnership with Interscope Records, and really loved being in the studio with artists more than anything. Interviewing artists on the show was great. Being in the studio with artists and actually creating that music with them was even more interesting. So I went over to MySpace, left MTV, and it seemed like a bit of a crazy decision at the time because TRL was uber popular, and it just didn't really feel like I had any more passion for the output, let's call it. Let's call it just the distribution of it. I was more interested in the genesis of it. And that's what I got to do over at MySpace Records, and had some really interesting sessions and meetings. And I remember bringing Drake in before Lil Wayne even got his hands on him. I was the first A&R to bring Drake in for a meeting, thanks to a friend of mine in Toronto who heard this mixtape Comeback Season and was like, yo, man, you should bring in Drake. And I'd interviewed him on MTV a couple of years prior. So I said, okay, let me see. I remember actually after the interview, we were walking down the hall from the MTV studio, and Drake was like, I really like being an actor on Degrassi and promoting it like we just did, but I'm really more excited about music. And he was just starting out, and I said, well, good luck with that. Let me know how that goes. Let me know how I can support. And then sure enough, cut to me being at MySpace Records. He got really excited. So we had a meeting in LA, and things like that were really interesting, intimate experience of being with artists in a more vulnerable setting. Actually, that's really what I think, if I could zoom in on what the texture of those moments were with a Drake before he blew up, it's a vulnerability. It's an artist who hasn't been established yet, right? So like if I think about MTV and TRL, these are artists who are very established, who are coming by the show. And on some level, it was like the victory lap to be on TRL. So there wasn't the challenge of developing an artist and actually helping someone find their voice. And that's what got me really excited being there at MySpace for that time.
That's really interesting. I'd love to double click on that here for people listening to this, because it is the Creative Path podcast. And a lot of people listening to this have their own creativity, their own creative expression, but are not superstars, right? They haven't blown up, so to speak. And you had a chance to see artists who had blown up, artists who hadn't, and artists who hadn't yet but would later on. And what did you notice? What was the thing that made you go, oh, this person will be a star, or this person has the it factor? And did everyone who had made it have that thing? Was there a common theme?
Definitely. So I'll double click on Beyonce as an example. She would always come into the studio with a certain focus about the project. And she would also have an interesting way of compartmentalizing who she was with me off camera. She was always really sweet. And at the time, I think Beyonce hadn't quite even stepped into her fullness as we know her now, but she had this interesting way of just being really thoughtful and not necessarily braggadocious. It was more about the art piece that she had created and really honoring that in the midst of promoting it, right? So that being different from some artists who would come in and they had a different energy. It was something that didn't feel quite as grounded in the reverence for the actual craft. And you could tell that Beyonce was so deeply invested in what she was talking about. It wasn't just a copy and paste kind of thing. It wasn't what a lot of artists do. They try to, make a hit, and it's not as thoughtfully put together. So it felt like something that she had really, really put her heart and soul into. And I almost felt like she would be trying to do it justice, actually. That was the sense that I got from artists like her. I interviewed a lot of different artists. And so I definitely noticed that the ones who were that level have a certain sort of a sacred quality to the way they actually approach not only the making of the art, but also even talking about it later. It's not just any conversation. It's an elevation that they bring to it. It's like, how can I describe it? It's kind of like when you talk about your poetry, actually. I feel the same way.
You're bringing me back to this moment. And for people listening to this, Q and I have known each other for, it's got to be like 10 years, man. It's a decade. Time. And we don't see each other that often, but we actually wound up in Ibiza together.
Yeah.
And I just finished, I hadn't even released it yet.
Yeah.
But I just finished my new spoken word poetry album, The Journey Back to You.
Yeah.
And I remember we went to the beach, you and I, and had really a listening ceremony to it. And it was just you closing your eyes and really receiving that. And as you talk about the sacredness of how artists hold their art, I definitely feel that about my art, but also just art in general and the role that art plays in society. And I appreciated so much how you wanted to receive the album and knowing that you hold it in that way. And also hearing that there are major artists that you've seen who that's a common theme amongst those who've been incredibly successful.
Definitely. I think if you really put your heart and soul into something, like I know you did in that project, that you'd want someone to also put their heart and soul into receiving it. That's the whole point, right? And so, yeah, for sure, the listening experience is really something. And I also just have learned a lot about what it takes to really receive fully in the sound that people put together, and how the auditory cortex gets optimized when we knock out the sense of sight, and so we actually take in more information. Our body actually receives more of what's really good about the sound to give. So yeah, I definitely have a different kind of way of listening to things. I used to just listen to records real quickly on drives on the way to work or whatever. But now I really make a point of having moments with it, especially with friends who put together projects that really matter, It's only right.
And so that's a almost foundational approach to creativity and art that these artists had. Now talk to me about the creative process, because you're in studio with a Beyonce and a Kanye West and everyone in between. What did you notice about the creative process that was similar amongst them? And then, because to me, I feel it could be so crazy different from person to person.
Well, I'll zoom in on Kanye because I do believe, despite some of the things that he says and how he offends people, I think he's arguably the most important generation of our artist of our time. I mean, it's funny even saying that statement, right? Like I stumbled saying it probably because I feel like I'm going to trigger people to say that. But no, but I really believe, to get it out clean, because I do believe this, I think when you look at his impact on culture, on hip hop specifically, and how hip hop has had this inflection point to become the most powerful genre of any genre in the world for a long time now, when we look at the actual inflection point, it was Kanye. You can point back to how Drake was successful because Kanye actually created 808s and Heartbreak, right? Like, so for me, looking at Kanye's process is actually a blueprint to map to become the greatest artist you can be. Because what he did that I didn't see any artist do to the level that I saw him do it was get obsessive about the music that he was making. So when you would come into the studio with Ye, we wouldn't talk about anything other than the actual song that was about to be played or was just played. There was nothing else that mattered, right? So you've been to studio sessions. You know, some people a little bit more casual. You can talk about just about anything, and that's a different thing. That's a different dynamic. When you're talking about music with Ye, you get in there. You get right in there.
And what is the conversation around? Is it around the meaning of it? Is it around how he's making it? Is it around what he's thinking? Like, what is the actual conversation?
Well, I remember one session in particular, he had just come up with a song. This was before College Dropout came out. I can't remember what the song was exactly, but we had a room of creatives. Myself, Jay Ivy was in there. I think Cootie and Chicken might have been in there. And we were sitting around, and he just wanted to play something to get the pulse of this particular group on that song. And so, of course, we were invested. We listened, and then we all shared in a very informal way about how we felt about the song, like, ooh, that part, or and you could tell he's like a scientist when it comes down to it. So yes, he's got his convictions, he's got these perspectives as the artist that he is, but he's really smart about having really great talent around him, and then knowing when to bring in this voice or this producer. That's one of the things he does so well. He is as much of a visionary, that you can see the whole game and be able to pick the right player to run this play. Like when you look at his body of work, what he's done so well is bring in a Brandy to sing this part, because he knows Brandy's voice, that timbre that she has, will be perfect for this track, right? So like he has an ability to curate. So as much as people will criticize some of his tendencies that seem a little bit narcissistic, when you look at his creative process, it is deeply in community and deeply understanding that he can't do it himself. And so he is very talented at also bringing in the right kind of players to play the game with him.
So, there's two different directions I want to go. But when we talk about community, you are, in my experience, one of the most just gregarious, friendly. You'll talk to anyone. You'll be best friends with the bank teller, in 5 seconds. And you've always been that way, as far as I've known you. Yeah. And that lends itself to, you can call up me or anyone else at any point in time all around the world and say, hey, I need some support with this thing. And people got you, right? And when you talk about Kanye and the way that he creates, which is very much in community, that's somewhat surprising to me to hear in a lot of ways, because I think that a lot of artists have this idea that we're in it by ourselves, that we're in it alone. It feels so lonely sometimes, especially when you have that obsession about your art and what you want to say. How do you personally, and then what you've seen in the industry, how do you manage that aspect of creating what's true for you and that lone wolf? So many artists feel that you need to go into a cocoon of isolation almost to create. While meanwhile, I'm hearing you talk about one of the greatest creators in music of our time as being incredibly communal with it. And I know you to be very communal. So talk to me about that.
Yeah, I think it's all about time and place and knowing where you're at with something, and if it's something to go inward with or something to start to come out with, and then to know who to actually have in the room in those moments. So another artist who I thought was always really interesting in the way he worked was Maxwell, really, really gifted. And he would work in a very insular way. So even though I was a good friend of his at the time, when he was making some of his best music, I couldn't get in the studio with him at all. He was always very, very in his own little bubble. So that's where he was in that process, right? But then there's a point where he wants to get a second opinion. He'll bring it out in that moment. So I learned a lot in that moment of just how to just honor wherever you are in your process. Like if I feel a little bit tender about something, like I'm not quite ready to roll it out to anybody, I need to just incubate a little bit more, spend a little bit more time with it, I'll do that, you know? So Maxwell knew that that's what he needed in his process. And then you also got to know when to open up and see what other people have to say about it, because the input you can get can change the trajectory of a song or a film in a beautiful way. I mean, I think we do have this thing that is inextricable to the human experience where I can only see from where I'm sitting. This is the point of view I have. It's a subjective perspective, and we all have blind spots, but you bring in the right person at the right time to give a perspective. Ooh, man, there is something priceless about that. And to know who to share with is part of the game. You got to know who is someone who's earned your vulnerability. That's a vulnerable moment, you know, as a creator, to share something, because you can have somebody who's not really in line with your vision and, you know, what you care about, and they won't hear what you hear in it, and they might not be your audience. You don't want to share with that person in that moment where you're incubating something. So it really does matter what the incubation process consists of. You got to get the right ingredients at the table. So I've definitely learned a lot of lessons about that. I've had studio sessions and work with people in different stages of different projects, and their feedback is like a train wreck to hear. You're just like, hold on, are we even thinking about the same audience? You know what I mean? Like, you know, if you have someone with a pop sensibility and all they think about is the metrics and that as the definition of success, but you're talking about an art project that's a passion project. You're talking about making a message that's going to mean something to this kid who's 16 thinking about killing himself. You're not thinking about getting on the charts. You're thinking about communicating to that kid who needs to hear you. So you got to make sure you're having the same conversation with people. You know? So
you just said something really interesting. I recorded a solo podcast recently about my opinion on the difference between art and content. And the basis of it is that art is inwardly focused. I am creating art based off of what I'm feeling and what I need to express. And so there's a purity to that. And then content is created with, what does the audience want? What does the audience want to hear? What do they want to see? That's the main difference. And it's outwardly focused, right? And it's awesome when they line up. When they can overlap, you like scored. When your art is, you know, created in a way that works for the medium, like when my poem went viral. But when you were talking about, being focused on the kid that needs to hear it, who might be suicidal or whatever, I want to know your perspective on that art versus content. And how much of what you create or what you've seen other high level creators, because that's something that's very interesting, that most people would dream of being in the same room as the rooms you've been in and the conversations you've had, and we can learn from greatness. I want to learn how you hold art and the inward versus outward focus in the creation process.
So this is what my TED Talk was about. You remember, you saw that. The whole TED Talk was breaking down that intersection. Really, it's for me about soul versus scale. And it is a very distinct thing. And I do think it's important to get honest. So in my process, more often than not, I go art. Obviously, you just look at my, whole trajectory is based on me not necessarily caring about scale anymore and being way more interested in soul. And obviously the work I do now is deeply informed by that and sound practice. And so that's the most intimate experience of sound. And then TRL was the most scaled version. And so, yeah, the experience for me of going more and more into my heart, really, and not necessarily caring so much about how many people are listening, has been a journey for sure. I mean, it's kind of like I equate it to being a crackhead in remission sometimes, because the amount of dopamine that you get from being in thousands, from, you know, these freaking stadiums. I used to host, you know, in front of thousands and thousands of people, and knowing that it broadcasted to millions and millions of people, and knowing that there was lots of money coming into my bank account. That was a very distinct experience. It took quite a bit to walk away from it. But for me, it was prioritizing the experience that I could render in an intimate setting with different tools that render a way deeper impact. So that's how I've really come to terms with my decision to walk away from all of it, was what are my values? You know, that's really what it's come down to. I value transformation. I value direct impact. I value being able to actually know that I left something better than I found it. Knowing that my audience, in this case, the participants in a Sound Sanctuary experience, are walking out of the room better than they came in. Like, knowing that in my bones has meant more than any amount of money that I could get from any network that could pay me. So for me, that's a definition of success that informs everything that I do. And I can't go back. It's funny, like, I've had friends of mine who are still in that game talk to me about my experience now. You know, a lot of them, they deal with anxiety. They deal with a lot of different identity stuff, you know, because I think we all want to feel purposeful. We want to feel like our work is meaningful, but a lot of times in the pop world, it's hard to qualify the impact when you're making songs that don't necessarily have the kind of potency that you can have if you're directed towards impact as your sole definition of success, right? Like, if you're a pop artist and you're coming up with songs that are catchy, but not necessarily a message there that's altogether empowering, maybe has layers of whatever is trending at the time, and you're compromising what you actually feel in your heart to communicate, that's a different reality, right? And it happens all the time.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I got a crash course in that. I dated a music kind of celebrity for a little bit, and repped by big record label on, you know, billboards in Times Square, like legit in the music industry. And to get to see, observe, and hear what had to be compromised and sacrificed in order to put out an album was so heartbreaking to me.
Yeah, it is.
It really is heartbreaking to know that they made over 90 demos, and the label picks the ones that you're going to put on the album. And then the label tells you what needs to shift and change. And there was so much meaning that was lost. The artist, what she actually wanted to say, and the tracks that meant the most to her, and all of these things, a lot of them were just a no by the label. And I couldn't wrap my head around that trade-off of, wait, so you literally have other people tell you what you can put out into the world as an artist, as in exchange for the idea that you will get to, the art that they pick, you'll get to share with more people. Right? Like, that's the trade-off. Yeah. I get bigger stages, I get bigger stadiums, I get bigger platforms with this stuff, but it's not even the stuff that's most true to your heart. So is it really, I couldn't wrap my head around that trade-off. So obviously that relationship didn't last very long, but I hadn't seen it up close like that, man.
Oh yeah.
And it's really hard for someone like myself to think about ever sacrificing the ability to use art as a way to express my deepest truths. But there are so many artists, even some listening to this right now, who are sitting with, do I have to make that compromise to actually get where I want to get? What message would you have for those people?
Well, it's possible. it's possible to have it all. It really is. And I hate to say it again, but Ye's an example. That dude is not compromising his artistic vision. Never has, never will. We know this. And it works because he puts in the work to find that pocket that has that potency, that vibration, all of that, and means a lot. You know, he puts in time. And so I really do hate using his example, but you know,
just admit it. You love Kanye West.
The thing is, his output,
own it, bro. Own it.
His output, you know what? Every interview he's given, very questionable. His actual craft is undeniably always inspiring to me.
Do you think to be a great artist, the kind that will last the test of time, you have to be a little crazy?
Define crazy.
Just completely not mentally operating by the standards put in place by society.
I think there's something to that. Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I think the greatest artists are the ones that push us forward. They go to the edge of society and they say, okay, well, what's next though?
Okay.
You know?
Do you think you or I qualify? Are we crazy? Are we?
Most definitely. I mean, just look at our track record.
Yeah.
That, to me, the results are the greatest guru. Like if you're wondering, you know, who you are, just look at your results, you know? And when I look at your body of work, it seems like you're definitely someone who is not interested in selling out. You could have definitely figured out some choreography, bro. I've seen you dance. You could figure out the choreography. You could have been like, you know, in the next NSYNC.
Don't sell me short. I still got some Justin Bieber future in me. You'll see me poetry, music, dance. I got it. Yeah, you know, I just did weeks of dance training.
You could definitely start a boy band if you want. If you
and
really
you've seen me play guitar.
I've seen you play guitar. You could go that route. You could do the singer-songwriter vibes, like John Mayer vibes. You know, but
yeah, that's a moment.
That's a great example of an artist. I think John Mayer is another one who, when you sit and talk with John Mayer, I remember an interview I did with him backstage at a concert that he did. And we were just sitting there in his tour bus, and I just asked him a simple question that every other artist I interviewed would basically have a pretty linear answer to. John went into this portrayal, this moment, this depiction of a moment that he had with a fan in the third row of a show, and he described her face at one point going into a Rockwell painting. And like, so, you know, there's an example, a snapshot of someone who, by most standards, if you listen to John in that moment, if you're someone who is like a linear thinking person who's been in a box about how you're supposed to communicate in an interview, we'll be like, hold on, wait, hold on. That's the deviation from the script, you know.
Glitch in the Matrix,
you know. But for me, it was wildly interesting because he was being an artist in that moment. I heard the question cue, and I'm going to go over here and describe this and really paint this picture for you that is fun for me. First of all, you know, you could see like how he works, and it's just to keep him interested. And by virtue of that, other people are more interested too, who are ready for that, right? So Jim Carrey was another one. I remember sitting down, very standard interview for a movie coming out, you know, a whole promo tour situation, publicists left and right, producers, whatever. They all expected like a certain time that we were going to do the interview in. Jim had a different plan. Jim was like, we won't just jazz it out, baby. And Jim and I ended up having a much more in-depth conversation about like the nature of reality. And it was like supposed to be about the movie. You know, you could see the publicist off camera looking at him like, what the, you know, like, we didn't talk about this. You know,
you didn't mention the movie once.
Yeah. And so, yeah, I do think that, you know, to own the artist, to own who you are, to own that you are someone that pushes boundaries, that is your role in society. Artists have always been the ones in society who are able to call us forward in the most creative, interesting, compelling, and emotional ways. And so, you know, whenever I talk to artists who are doubting the path, I say, well, look at who has led us down the path in society at large, right? Some politicians maybe can get there, like JFK represented something, you know, some thought leaders, MLK represented something. But when I look at a John Lennon and a song like Imagine, you know what I'm saying? Like that's a different ball game. That touches the soul in a different way. It transcends party lines. It goes beyond a lot of the things that can get in the way of, the inspiration that can take place. So to be an artist is the greatest honor, and I'm still in my journey of getting to the point where I'm going to actually put out some of what I do in these sound sessions. And that's an exciting thing, because this will also be pushing some boundaries. Sound meditation is not pop music. It's, something that is for a very particular person who knows the value of sound and can actually be still and appreciate the stillness within the sound. They don't need the chorus, verse, chorus, verse, chorus, and the bop. They can actually realize, wow, this is actually deeply helpful for me here. So it's going to be something that for me is a really big step in owning my trajectory fully and saying, I not only believe in this modality of sound meditation, but I'm going to plant my flag and put out something that is going to be living for the rest of, the time that we can stream. Yeah. And so I'm like gearing up for that. People have asked me to record these sessions that I've been doing.
What do you tell people the sessions sound?
So we're talking about amazing instruments like the gong and singing bowls from Tibet and chimes and a shamanic drum and these things that have a certain potency of harmonics, actually. So we can talk about the history of the equal temperament tuning system that came in back in the Baroque era. It changed the way we fundamentally actually experience sound. That was a huge fracture. It's kind of like when we look at food and the food system and GMOs and how people rationalized genetically modified, same thing, different context.
Interesting. So tell me about equal temperament tuning. What did they do?
At a certain point, there was a decision made that we needed a better way to transpose a song from one key to another. So a tuning system was devised to be able to do that. And not bad intentions. And nonetheless, it created a situation where the full range of harmonics that were available, let's say you look at an instrument like the gong, right? And you listen to a gong and you can hear a range of harmonics that aren't available in a lot of these recordings you might hear on Spotify. And there's a reason why people feel downright primal and liberated and deeply seen in the soundscape of a gong, because it has that sort of a range of harmonics. It mirrors really what we see in nature, and the same reason why we resonate with nature and we feel like, oh wow, I can really breathe more. It's an unmodified kind of thing. It's the full range of the harmonic series that we're listening to when we listen to a gong. So it really is, to me, the most pure experience of what we love about music. And I'm not making music or the equal temperament tuning system wrong, but we just got to know that there's a time and a place, right? So if you're someone who's struggling with anxiety, or you're having an existential crisis around who you are, you need deeper answers, you want to go to the right tools, you want to go to the right place to actually resolve those things, right? If you're someone who wants to dance down the street, I mean, that's a different ballgame. But, the people that come to these experiences, the sound meditation experience, most of them are dealing with big questions like, do I stay with my husband? Or do I choose this career path over the one that's provided for me and my family for this many years? So it's like, you want to really go deep to be able to make sure that you're coming up with an answer that's sustainable and that's the right path for you. And so, you don't necessarily want to go to just any source. You certainly wouldn't want to go to a pill to resolve anxiety when the source of anxiety is you not being your authentic self. And so getting to the root of that requires a certain tool set. So that's really what I love about sound meditation. It helped me when I was grappling with figuring out whether I should divorce my wife. And I went into a sound meditation and I got the clarity and the conviction to actually go through with that. It was the toughest decision of my life. So that's why I feel strongly about this, because I felt the benefits fully of it being able to be a soundscape that's distinct, that creates a space for clarity.
What do you think it is about sound? Because people have maybe heard of sound healings or been to a sound healing before a cacao ceremony? You know, like these things that or it's very common in sort of the new age spiritual communities, and I think more in mainstream communities as well, sound healing. But when you talk about what you do and the sound meditations, you talk about it in a way that most sound healers that I know don't even speak about it, which is it's opening up answers. It is, there's things that you're struggling with internally. The sound will help you with that. Can you talk about how that works and your perspective on it?
For sure. So with sound and whatever word goes after it, we got to consider how language really frames the way that we engage with something. So if I'm going into a sound healing, what's the implication? That the sound is going to heal me, versus a sound meditation, which brings about a different sort of engagement, and it creates a different result. It creates a different sort of a point of resonance, actually. So like if I'm having a passive experience in a sound healing or a sound bath where, you know, I think just by being in the room, I'm going to get the result. I'm not going to be engaged. I'm not going to listen from the perspective of how a meditator would listen and come back to it. You know, if my mind drifts, that I could come back to it. Just like any solid meditation practice, Vedic, Vipassana, the thing that is amazing about these styles of meditation is that it inspires a single point of focus so that you can really ultimately master your mind, which is an incredible muscle to do. And then you combine that with the benefits of sound, and that as the single point of focus, you're going to get a different result, right? So that's why I talk about it as sound meditation, because it really sets up the participant to engage fully, to really listen. And then you're actually giving yourself a shot to be the point of resonance. When you talk about resonance, that's another thing that gets thrown around a lot, but it's not just about the thing that's being emitted, right? It's not actually just the frequency or the vibration I'm emitting. It's you being actually a match for it that creates resonance. So to be a match for the frequencies that come out of these instruments, you get to be in the listening of it, right? It's like the equivalent of being on a date. You can be in front of the most charismatic, amazing, heart-centered human, but if you are cynical and don't believe that that exists for you, you won't be a match for it. And so that's really why I want to set up a different conversation around sound by calling it sound meditation, because it's going to have you engaged in a way that will give you a shot to really be intimate with the sound. It's very distinct. It's going to have you dancing with the sound in a different way, right? So it gives the sound the opportunity to really get in there. So the auditory cortex being optimized by having your eyes closed is another piece. Or just look at the information that you could actually get. You know, if you're distracted by the sense of sight, I call it the Stevie Wonder effect. You know, we wonder why Stevie Wonder has that, you know, a relationship with music where he just seems to experience music more than all the rest of us. Part of it is because he's blind. His auditory cortex is so well developed because he's got no distraction from sight. So that's why in our meditations, we offer people an eye mask to be able to experience what it's like to just listen. So it's these kinds of ways of refining the way that we experience sound and understanding the impacts of it. I mean, think about how we listen to most music, right? Like we're probably working out or driving or dancing or at a barbecue. You know, there's all these things that are pulling focus. And I'll use the metaphor of being on a date again. If you're on a date and you're able to just lock in on that person and what they're saying and how they're being, and you have that level of presence versus you have your phone going off and you're, you know, kind of handling something going on with work at the same time as that person in front of you, it's going to be a different result. You're not actually taking in the information that you could to actually, by the end of the date, have a different conclusion, you know? You might still be wondering whether you're into the person, you wonder why. Same thing with music and sound. So if you dedicate the next song that you're really into in the way that, you know, you could carve out time and space and really sit there and listen to it and just notice how you feel, you're going to know what I mean. It's just, you know, because you're also someone who really appreciates, you know, listening and really getting everything you can. It's a range, right? It's a spectrum. And I don't make anybody wrong for working out while listening to music. I do it all the time. I was just listening to hip hop the other day. I still listen to really aggressive hip hop. Beanie Siegel, The Truth was in my, playlist, and I was bumping it and on repeat. And that's because I wanted that result. I wanted to feel Beanie Siegel, The Truth in my system. I had that level of like, let me hear that. That's the tone I want to hear right now. And then there's moments where I want to hear Niels Fromm says, because it evokes something different, and that's what I want to experience in my system. So, there's a time and place for everything. And I think just knowing, okay, if I want to render a result like the clarity about this big decision I want to make, sound meditation is probably a better way to go than most modalities I know, because you get deeper into yourself, and that's where the answers really are,
And for you as the curator of this and the one facilitating, how much of it is requiring innovative creativity from you? Like you know so much about the creative process. You've seen greats in studio. And so what are you taking from all of that learning early in your life into how you create what you're creating now?
Yeah, it's spirit of play for sure. That makes it something that's sustainable for me first and foremost. And so noticing how Ye would be in the studio like a kid in the candy store, that was a seed planted that, he was having that much fun. You can have that much fun with something that you're going to put out to the world. Cool. Noted. And so when it comes down to it, I definitely play for whoever's in the room with me, but I also make sure that I'm enjoying it. I'm the first person that needs to feel satisfied. And so that's the biggest thing that I've noticed that really works, because I'm dropped in a certain way. Like I have a level of taste that I can trust. And so, let's say I didn't necessarily have confidence in my taste. Maybe it would be different. Maybe I'd be looking for external cues more. And I do that too. I'm also like checking in with everyone, and for any given thing I play, I'm noticing the impact in real time, which is another beautiful thing about this medium. As a sound practitioner, you get to see in real time, because people are so open and so in the moment, and their systems are in that responsiveness to the sound. Literally, I can hit a tuning fork and I can see someone's nervous system go, that is the greatest audience someone can have, because it's also this feedback loop that's undeniable. You just see it. You see it in real. You don't have to speculate most often.
It's almost like DJing.
Totally.
Yeah, because DJing is a similar thing. I've had the opportunity to just be behind the DJ booth more, but then I learned how to DJ, and I just saw, wow, you can just do this thing like a low pass, and suddenly it's woo, 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 and you just see the crowd react. Yeah. Just somatically, everyone's body starts moving differently, and in ways you're just pulling the strings on a giant crowd of people, and I can see it being very addictive.
It's incredible. It's incredible. And of course, you want to make sure you map it to their intentions. So for any given session, I'm always very keen to listen to, like last night, I was leading two women in a beautiful sound and psychedelic journey, and we talked about what they wanted to get out of the experience. And so the way I played was highly informed by what they wanted to get as a result. If they had said to me, Q, we just want to have fun. Like, this is rock, I just want to loosen up. Cool. I'm going to play something different than what they shared. They shared some very personal outcomes that they wanted, and profound healing that needed to occur for them. And I was very different because of that information. And I love having that kind of relationship with who I'm playing for. And so that's what I love about this day and age as an artist, is that you actually can, on some level, understand your audience way better than artists used to because of social media.
And so what is, you mentioned psychedelics, right?
Yeah.
And psychedelics being a part of these experiences. What is the role that you've seen psychedelics play in creativity amongst all the varied creatives you've been around in your own journey?
Well, psychedelics help us get out of the default mode. They help us get out of the patterned ways that we tend to think, in neural pathways that are so practiced and patterned. And so psychedelics are super helpful. And now we have the science to actually substantiate what spiritualists have known for so long about how psychedelics, specifically psilocybin. I can't speak to all psychedelics, but psilocybin is what I specialize in serving. And so with psilocybin, now we know that it creates connections in the brain that weren't happening before. It's neurogenesis that's happening when we have psilocybin. So that's why psilocybin to me is a great creative ally, because it literally helps us make connections that we weren't making before. It makes sense when you think about the mycelium network, where mushrooms are derived from. It's running underneath the earth and it connects down under there so much. So it's really amazing and poetic to think that that's actually happening in the brain too. So it really does help to get us out of some of the ways that we can get a little stagnant and we can get a little limited in the ways that we operate. And for me, it's been incredible to experience things that I literally feel are popping me out of the way that I usually play. Like last night, I was playing the gong last night in a way that I've never played before. And could I have done that without psilocybin in my system? Maybe, totally. It's possible. Sometimes I have experienced that with no psychedelics involved. Psychedelics definitely help. They're an ally.
I'm a big proponent. I'm a big fan. Everyone, if you follow me or listen to this podcast, you know that, and I agree with everything that you've said in terms of just the ability for them to activate the brain in a way that it just wouldn't activate without. And now when you combine a brain that is operating differently than normal with an activity you do normally, like playing an instrument or something, it will unlock different aspects. So I think it's a great ally for that. So the last place I want to take us here is somewhat selfish. I want to use you here as use me as a guinea pig. But one thing that I know that you've done throughout, because what you just described, I'll tell you how I'm getting here. Right? What you just described is this journey from TRL fame, to being around all these famous people, to saying goodbye to that world, and now following your heart with these small, intimate groups. But the passion I feel in what you're doing with sound, you can still see the connections for how you were processing even back in the day with TRL. And so for my question for you now is, I also know that you've been brought in to help direct as a creative director, an actual director, and A&R, artist development. You have an eye for spotting greatness in someone, or what it is that makes that person great, and then amplifying that. And you've been doing that with yourself recently, is what I've noticed over the last several years, a journey of figuring out how to be A&R for yourself, and what direction is Quddus going. But there are a lot of people listening to this, myself included to a degree, that go, how do I spot that? How do something that's attractive about the manager, agent, record label is they go, this is your set, this is what you're creating, this is, and they elevate that. So for someone listening to this who's still trying to figure out their voice, still trying to figure out their superpower, that thing, how do you approach it as someone who's seen and helped develop artists?
Yeah, good question. So there's this ancient Greek word called gnosis, and I love that as a frame for what we're talking about here, because gnosis is embodied wisdom, and it feels different than a notion. It feels different than a dopamine hit. It feels different than other people think it's cool, therefore I should think it's cool. It feels like embodied wisdom. It feels like, whoa, there is a resonance. What I'm seeing, what that person is doing, there is a resonance. I feel like that is speaking to my soul in a very distinct way that I want to have more of in my life. Like that to me is the baseline.
And is it you as the audience feeling that resonance, or are you observing, even if you don't resonate with their art, you're observing them in resonance?
So if you're talking about being a tastemaker, are you talking about identifying talent, or are you talking about in yourself? Yeah,
I'm talking about, so let's use me as an example, right? I've had people recently tell me, bro, you should be going all in on your performing artist. Just the way that when you go to a musician's Instagram page, it's their music. It's very clear this is what they do. They're a musician. Or you go to a lot of poets, you go to their page, it's just all their poetry. It's just poetry. And they're saying, you know, you can go viral. You know that people love you. People introduce you as a poet. Yeah. So why aren't you all in on that thing?
Good question.
It's a good question. And it's my answer is, well, I'm also really great as a coach, and I love coaching and teaching, right? Yeah. So there's that element.
You see how you just said love?
Yeah.
You notice how you said love just now? What did you feel? What did you feel when you said love?
Energy.
Yeah. What kind of energy?
Like turn on energy. Like I get excited, inspired.
That's gnosis.
Yeah. Right. But I also feel that when I talk about performing my poetry and working on my book and these things. And so then you look at you in the creative director A&R seat and you're going, okay, Adam, here's the deal. This is where my advice would be to really focus at this stage. Because as artists, often we can see all the things that we could do and want to do all of them. And I know you've had that idea too, just like so many things. So when you're in the observer seat, right, how are you perceiving it so that people listening to this could get some insight into maybe what their next steps would be?
Yeah, I mean, we could take it to you because, you know, that was the frame, right? I definitely see what you're doing. And, you know, as a friend, I'm always amazed actually at your capacity to do all these different things in the way that you do them. I'm like, I don't know, like I admire the output and the multidimensionalism of it. And what I'm getting in this conversation is that, and it's the same thing I see as well in my journey, is that it's possible. Again, it's possible that you can be equally prolific as a poet, as a coach. It's possible that you can have as much passion for poetry as you do coaching, and that you can do it all. Now that goes against so much. I even saw your eye twitch. Your left eye like twitched. All of the things that we hear about niching and all of that stuff. There's a wisdom to that, and I think there's something to be said about knowing what season you're in. You know, and so here's what I'll say though about focus. So like, let's say that poetry is actually your North Star, your mountaintop, the thing that you were designed to do on this planet. But let's say coaching actually plays a role in that somehow. What if by coaching people the way you do, you know, you get into these intimate conversations with people about the things that matter the most to people, which is a very distinct conversation. Some people aren't privy to the human condition at the extent that you are as a coach. Poets aren't privy to the human condition if they're just doing poetry to the extent that you are exposing yourself as a coach. So what if your ecosystem that you've built has been perfectly designed for you to be a very different breed of poet because of the type of exposure that you've created for yourself within the human condition to speak about?
Which you are speaking to something that I believe deeply, which is we're in this sort of Avengers, Thanos, Infinity Stones journey as humans. And we never, our thing, our dharma is combining more of them, not leaving any parts out. That's my view. So the me that first fell in love with acting, like that part of me shows up on stage, right? That shows up, that part of me that fell in love with making artistic films and short films and that sort of thing shows up in how I direct my content. It's the poet shows up in how I coach, because now I actually have clients at different times be like, this is a perfect thing for you to write a poem about. To go, I don't write poetry. No, you're gonna write a poem. Trust me. And so when we can do that and we find the overlap of more of the things that we really light up talking about, I think we then develop what's uniquely ours. And so I really appreciate your perspective on that.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's great. I see it. And I hear the poetry in the way that you talk about your next program when you promote it, you know what I mean? So it works both ways. And yeah, I think it's beautiful. I think we're all so multidimensional and it's important to honor it.
Perfect. All right. So we have just a few minutes left, and I want to go rapid fire with these final 5 questions that I ask people based off of my Artistic Entrepreneur Incubator program. And there's these 5 modules that we really go through and focus on. They're not always linear, but I want rapid fire from you. The first module is about identifying your core conflict. Because the core conflict that you have faced off with over and over again, it shows up in every area of your life and every stage of business. So what is your core conflict you've really faced off with?
We just talked about it for you. It's this conflict around what I'm supposed to be doing, what I should be doing, what I should be focused on, and on some level, not owning all of who I am. That's the core conflict. Is like, am I too much? Is this too much? Can people handle all of what I can bring to the table?
Perfect. Yeah. And then once we identify the core conflict, the second module is developing that 100% certainty offer. The thing that you know with 100% certainty, the right person getting this thing from me, it's game over. What is that certainty that you have that you bring to people?
Well, now the Sound Sanctuary Academy and how I can develop a sound practitioner or someone who's just interested in developing themselves with the tool of sound. And so, yeah, that's been a really beautiful place to land.
I've seen that develop, bro.
Yeah.
I've talked to you as you've been developing that, and to see the certainty landing in your body of just how effective you are at that is really beautiful.
Thanks, brother. Thanks.
And so after you have that certainty offer, the third step is you need to craft signature content. It's that content that really does the work of someone watches that and they get a sense of who you are and what you do, you're like the essence of you, right? When it comes to creating that type of content, do you have some, or do you approach it in a certain way?
Well, I'm certainly going to repurpose all of what we talked about today about sound for promoting the academy. I think it's really about having the conversation, knowing what conversation you're leading. Right now, I'm leading the conversation around what does it mean to be using sound to develop our consciousness and become who we're meant to be. So I'll talk about that. I'll talk about all the ways that this instrument or the way we play can be a metaphor in a sense for how we can play life. You know, that's really going to be the angle that I come at it with. So it's cool that we're having this conversation, because I'd been kind of, I gotta think about this with my team around, you know, what kind of content. So we're getting there now.
Okay.
But yeah, I think that's really it, is really understanding like how to be a bridge for people who may not necessarily understand the layers of power and potency in sound to come to sound with an appreciation for what it can do for them.
Okay. I love that. And then you go into the fourth module, which is I call dating your audience, which is really about how do you build a true lasting relationship with your audience. And I mean, you've seen some of the best in terms of building audiences. How do you approach building an authentic relationship with your audience?
I think respecting the audience, really respecting the audience is a big deal. I've seen the best really understand that their audience is a person that deserves a certain level of love and care, and that they are ultimately their customer. So I think about it like classic customer service. Like if somebody comes in your shop, you're going to take care of them. Like, what do you need? How can I help you? You know? And so really thinking about it from that lens, it really is helpful. It's not like this kind of extractive relationship or capitalistic relationship. Like, what can I get from you? It's really like, how can I serve you? How can I serve you with this thing called music or whatever it is?
Amazing. Last module. Once you have this in place, it's time to really build the monetization ecosystem, right? Like, how are you monetizing this passion, this art, this creativity, this idea? Any advice for someone who's working to do that right now?
Make it as simple as possible. Make it easy for people to go from inspiration to the checkout.
That's it. Keep it simple, stupid. The KISS method.
Really?
Yeah.
User journey. You know, think about like how you are when you're on a website, and how the Google philosophy is with having it really simple on the dang site to make it to like, oh, that's cool. I relate to that. This is where I sign up. Cool. Like really just think about it simply. You know, some people I see their websites and it's like, what are you doing? Are you doing a Picasso, or are you trying to get somebody to buy your thing? You know?
Yeah.
And so yeah, keep it simple.
I 100% agree with that. I love that. And Q, let people know how they can find you, follow you, find out more about everything that you're up to.
Yeah, soundsanctuary.org or Sound Sanctuary on Instagram.
There it is.
Simple.
Keep it simple. Keep it simple. Well, bro, I really appreciate that you came in today, that we've had the time to drop in.
Yeah.
And I love getting to witness you develop this thing that lights you up every time you talk about it and is making such an impact on the people who experience it. So I encourage everybody who's been listening to this, go check out Sound Sanctuary. And if you got value from this podcast, please make sure to share it out. That is one way that you can pay it forward. And make sure you tag myself or Q. Instagram.
Oh, Instagram is QUDDUS. I got to spell it out because
Quddus
Quddus ain't normal.
And at adam.roa, so that we can see what you most resonated with and you can be a part of this growing community that's walking this creative path. Thank you so much for walking it with us today. And I want to remind you that always, in all ways, you are seen, you are heard, and you are loved. Thank you so much for watching this video. I really appreciate you taking the time. If you are interested in building a life that you love through the 3 pillars of relationship, business, and creativity, then I encourage you to continue checking out more of my content, including this video, which I really think that you will like.